Hey guys, Jeff Kowalk coming to you with another book review, this time of a much anticipated Vanishing Inc release, The Darkest Corners. So this is one of the latest books put out by Vanishing Inc and the team there. It is completely devoted to the magic of Ben Hart. And if you're familiar with Ben, I was actually not. The first time I saw or really even heard of Ben was at Magi Fest this year, which maybe that means that I've been living under a rock, but I was not aware of him, nor was I aware of his magic until that point. I got to see him perform, and including some of the things from the book, which was really cool. I was also able to get this book ahead of the regular releases, so it pays to go to Magi Fest. I've said that over and over again, especially if you like Vanishing Inc books, and I do. If you've watched any of my videos before, you know that I do love their books. I think they're beautifully produced, and I don't think that this book is any exception to that. To me, this book is slightly a mixed bag. We'll get into that here in a minute, but first let's go over some of the good. So if you get some value out of this review, I hope that you will subscribe and click the like button below so that I know that you're watching, and I intend for this to be an open discussion with everybody so that we can get a variety of viewpoints and not just my own. These are some of my thoughts about The Darkest Corners by Neil Kelso and written about the magic of Ben Hart, put out by Vanishing Inc. First, the good is, as you know, with any Vanishing Inc purchase, you're going to get a very high quality, good production values book. And this is certainly no exception to that. You can even see from the cover here, it's got a neat effect where most of the time the cover looks entirely black when it's sitting on your shelf, but in the right light you can see the darkest corners here. One of the first things to note is that it is Ben Hart's magic, but it is written by Neil Kelso. I happened, the other benefit of going to Magi Fest is I did get Ben to sign this. He was very gracious in autographing it to me. And if you don't know Ben, hey, there he is. Surprisingly, he's older than he looks. I'm ashamed to say he is probably just a few years younger than me, but I look like I'm at least a decade older than him. Hey, pros and cons, I don't judge. There are quite a number of effects in this book, but before I get into the effects and the contents of the book, I wanted to talk about the production values. And like I talked about with the cover, it's great. The pictures and the layout are also beautiful. There's some, I really like the font choices in the book, with the headers and also the spacing and the design aspects. For the most part, I do like them. There are a few tiny nitpicks. We'll get into those in the cons, but in general, I think that it is a beautiful book. The pictures are full color and very nice, conveying the information that you need to learn the tricks. The spacing, this is a fast read. I was a little surprised by how fast that I got through this book. It looks like a pretty thick book, but I think due to the kind of unusual size, which has been the last couple, it's not an 8.5 by 11 book or anything like that. I think that the information is maybe a little more condensed than the typical Vanishing Inc. There are a lot of pictures. In general, it just reads very, very quickly. I got through it in less than a week. And I would say normally for a full-size magic book, it takes me a lot longer than that. So that can be a good thing if you don't want to spend a month in a particular book. This can be very good. I was not familiar with Ben's magic, and it was kind of a refreshing take on very classic tricks. He has a style that is pretty neat. It's kind of an organic, what I would call an organic magic style. He likes things that have to do with organic objects like peach pits and walnuts and dirt and Venus flytraps, and there's kind of this theme throughout, and flies and other things that give his magic definitely a feel that is uniquely his own, and I certainly respect that about him, that he was able to take a lot of traditional tricks and put his own stamp on it, which is, to me, essentially what you're getting here. If you like Ben Hart and his magic, then you're probably going to like this book. But even if you were unfamiliar with Ben Hart, there are probably some nuggets to glean from this. The magic will get you thinking kind of in new directions, and there are a lot of details in here that are well thought out. I was impressed with the level of thinking that went into a lot of these routines, and he's obviously very well read. He comments a lot. There's not really any bibliographical notes, but he comments a lot about how this effect and this book, he thought about it, and this was the genesis of the idea throughout the story here. Those are the positives. I'd say a few of the negatives, and this is where I really hate this, because I wanted to love this book, and I got to be honest with you and say that I didn't love it. I liked it, but I didn't love it. It's a Vanishing Inc book, so it's always going to have a place on my shelf because they make such great content. As I said at the beginning, I was not familiar with Ben Hart's work, so I did not buy this because I wanted to know how Ben does any trick that people may have seen him do on America's Got Talent. I primarily bought this because of the reputation of Vanishing Inc for putting out high-quality magic books, and it was available at Magi Fest to get it autographed by the author, so I picked it up. A few nitpicks for me that make this book less valuable to me than some of the more recent releases from Vanishing Inc, like Morgan and West's book, or Andy Gladwin's The Boy Who Cried Magic, or Distilled by Ryan Plunkett, which also just released. The thing about this book is, point number one is that it was written by Neil Kelso. No offense to Neil, I don't know him personally. I don't know anything about him. From what I can tell, this might be the second book on magic that he's written. I think he had a self-published book, and it shows a little bit. To me, it is not as well written as the standard that I expect from a Vanishing Inc book. Don't get me wrong, there's plenty of good things about it. It's easy enough to understand how to do everything, but the style itself, to me, left me wanting a little bit. There are some specific examples. To me, it's written from the standpoint of a fanboy of Ben Hart, and I was not a fanboy already, so that style got a little bit under my skin. It may not get under your skin, and there are plenty of people who will like that style. So again, these are my personal preferences about the book. And beyond that, though, from the standpoint of a fanboy, is it's a little bit awkward when someone else is doing the writing about someone else's magic, because you don't get all of the nuances of everything that they were thinking. And so there's also something missing there for me from the standpoint of describing the methods. It's just a little bit awkward. And again, you may like that. It wasn't up to what I considered to be Vanishing Inc's normal standard. There are a lot of jokes that he tries to insert that fall a little bit flat. You can't blame him for trying. We've all tried jokes that fall a little bit flat, but it added to that slightly irritated feeling when reading some of these effects. There are some effects in here that were what I'll call pipe dreams. I don't believe that Ben has actually performed these for real audiences, and he doesn't claim to, so there's no misrepresentation here, but there are some effects in there that you read and you think there's no way that would actually play. And I don't want to give anything away in terms of method, but there, for example, there's an effect where a fly takes off in flight with a piece of paper attached to it, streaming behind it, and you are supposed to wait for the fly to land and get the piece of paper off of it and make that a revelation. So if that gives you a little bit of a flair for some of the items that I thought were pipe dreams. Also, back to the layout, I mentioned that there were a lot of positives. It's a beautiful layout, relatively easy to read. There were a few segments where it wasn't, where there was a page from Ben's notebook that was transcribed, but they didn't tell you it was transcribed. They said that they were just going to give you some of his thoughts from a notebook that was not a full flushed trick, and they told you that up front. And so they tell you all that on page 1. Page 2 is a picture of his notebook with the effect written up, and it was written upside down, and there were parts of it that were upside down, I should say. And so you're flipping the book trying to read this, and you're reading handwriting, which is not always the easiest thing to do. And then page 3, you flip the page and the whole thing is transcribed. I felt like they should have indicated that the note was transcribed for you so that you weren't frustratedly trying to read through this. And many people will just blow past that. It's not a big deal. These are nitpicks. This is still a very fine book. It's just not perfect. I'm trying to be honest in this review and tell you about the things that I didn't particularly care for. A lot of these effects are going to play very well for Ben and his personality and his style and conditions of performing. They may not be for you. So again, if you've seen Ben perform and you want to know how he did that, this is a great book. If you're trying to find magic that might fit in your show, I think it's going to be a little harder to do that from this book. And that's okay, because I find that there's an incredible amount of value to figuring out how someone thinks about effects. And there is some of that, but this book is somewhat limited in that manner because it wasn't written by the author. So you're not getting all of those details about how he thought about it. You're getting just the overall thinking and effect. There were some effects that were very, very abbreviated, and I felt like could have been expanded upon. There should have been maybe some more detail. It was enough to get the effect and to figure out how to do it. But then there were others that went on and on and on. For example, the card in Ring, you read the effect and it's one of the biggest write-ups in the book. And they're kind of part of the build-up is, you're really going to love this effect. It's a great effect. And he put some new thinking into it. And so again, that fanboy perspective of talking about how Ben made this trick great. You get into the effect and there's quite a bit of detail, and that's good. And then you get to the end, and I feel like the whole section repeats itself with a slightly different presentation, but so nuanced that I thought I was reading the same thing over again. I thought that it was a mispublication and that they had published the two segments over again. And yet other effects, you get a page or two when I thought that there could have been more detail there. So your mileage may vary on that. There were some nitpicky things. So all in all, what am I trying to say? I think that this is a good book. It's not a great book. Like I said, if you already liked Ben Hart and his magic, you'll probably get a lot more value out of this than someone who isn't already a fan of Ben Hart and his magic. And if it were me advising you on how to spend your hard-earned dollars, I would say hold off on this if you've not bought Morgan & West's book, Parlor Tricks. If you haven't bought Ryan Plunkett's Distilled, if you haven't bought The Boy Who Cried Magic, there are a number of other books that I think are better, more recent releases than this, as well as countless other books that I will be reviewing here on my channel. Of course, if you disagree with me, I am totally open to that. I would like for you to comment down below and let me know your thinking about why I'm wrong or why you got more value out of the book. It is recommended, but only with reservations. I hope you enjoyed this video. Thanks for watching. Until next time, keep reading.